Embattled Democrats go nuclear. Republicans charge it's an effort to change the subject from Obamacare to blowing up tradition in the Senate. This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Brett Baer. It has long been said that timing is everything. Well, today, while a Democratic president is caught in a whirlpool of criticism over his signature health plan, his allies in the Senate threw him a political life preserver, the debate over a major rule change. We have Fox team coverage. Charles Krauthammer is in New York tonight, reacting to what is called the nuclear option. Ed Henry's at the White House with a presidential flip-flop. But we begin with Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel at the Capitol, and a nuclear option definitely producing a shockwave. Good evening, Mike.
Well, Brett, good evening. Republican leaders are accusing Democrats of a power grab and threatening that they will live to regret this bold move.
Complaining of gridlock, Senate Democrats changed the rules, eliminating filibusters for most presidential nominations. The vote was 52-48, mostly along party lines, and scraps nearly 225 years of precedent in the body known for deliberation.
The change we propose today would ensure executive and judicial nominations an up or down vote on confirmation. Yes, no. The rule change will make cloture for all nominations other than the Supreme Court, a majority threshold vote.
3 Democrats, Carl Levin, Joe Manchin, and Mark Pryor, voted with the GOP in opposition. Republican leader Mitch McConnell accused Reid of going nuclear to try and change the subject from Obamacare.
Millions of Americans are hurting because of a law Washington Democrats forced upon them. And what do they do about it? They cook up some fake fight over judges.
McConnell mocked Reid with another Obamacare reference.
He may just as well have said, if you like the rules of the Senate, you can keep them.
Later, a top Democrat fired back.
Mitch McConnell says we've tried to change the subject. I beg to differ. He doesn't want to address the filibusters. He doesn't want to address the rules changes, so 3/4 of his speech is dedicated to Obamacare. We are not changing the subject today. He is.
In the White House briefing room, President Obama expressed support.
Today's pattern of obstruction, it just isn't normal. It's not what our founders envisioned. A deliberate and determined effort to obstruct everything, no matter what the merits, just to refight the results of an election, is not normal.
But prominent Democrats didn't like the idea when it was threatened in 2005 when they were in the minority.
This nuclear option is ultimately an example of the arrogance of power.
The filibuster is far from a procedural gimmick. It's part of the fabric of this institution we call the Senate.
Today, Tennessee Republican Lamar Alexander sounded an alarm.
This is the most important and most dangerous restructuring of Senate rules since Thomas Jefferson wrote them at the beginning of our country. It's really not about the filibuster. It's another raw exercise of political power to permit the majority to do anything it wants whenever it wants to do it. It is Obamacare 2 in that sense.
Reid was asked if this will come back to bite him when Democrats are in the minority.
No, what I said on the floor, what I've told each of you, this is the way it has to be. The Senate has changed. The Senate has changed. Look what's happened.
This comes as the Senate is trying to finish up the defense authorization bill, and as lawmakers are trying to hammer out a budget agreement. Now there are serious doubts about what can be accomplished the rest of this Congress. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on a busy Capitol Hill tonight. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
With his poll numbers plummeting, President Obama is thankful for any distraction from the health care mess. But as Mike mentioned, there are potential downsides to the Senate move. More now from Chief White House Correspondent Ed Henry.
Barely an hour after President Obama had liberal pundits over for a long, off-the-record session to help shore up his base after weeks of pounding over health care, he came out whole hog for a tactical step that also rallies his partisan allies.
So, I support the step a majority of senators today took to change the way that Washington is doing business.
The president backing the extraordinary step of Democrats changing Senate rules to run roughshod over Republican attempts to block some of his nominees, including judicial picks who could hold sway over major regulatory matters, including how health care gets implemented.
The gears of government have to work. And the step that the majority of senators took today, I think, will help make those gears work just a little bit better.
The shift in focus to the so-called nuclear option also enables the president to try and change the subject from the broken gears over at healthcare.gov, which have been sinking his poll numbers, even as aides tried to downplay the significance of bringing in liberal pundits to try and right the ship.
The president's not focused on politics right now. What the president is focused on is implementing the Affordable Care Act in a way that maximizes the benefits of the law for millions of people all across the country.
Except earlier this week, the president himself framed this as a political campaign, as he urged his liberal supporters at Organizing for Action to beat back Republican attempts to dismantle the law.
So I've run my last political campaign, but I've got one more campaign in me, and that's making sure that this law works. And we're not backing off one bit.
Today, the president was reflective about the war over nominations.
Now, I realize that neither party has been blameless for these tactics. They've developed over years, and it seems as if they've continually escalated.
In fact, those tactics were developed in part by then-Senator Obama in 2005, who threatened to block all of then-President Bush's environmental nominations until he got his way on a lead paint policy. And he lashed out at Republican Mitch McConnell's 2005 threats to use the nuclear option against Democrats.
I sense that talk of the nuclear option is more about power than about fairness. I believe some of my colleagues propose this rules change because they can get away with it rather than because they know it's good for our democracy.
Though aides now insist the president's change of heart is not hypocritical.
Then Senator Obama would argue that it was a substantive position, but he was obstructing nominees. What's different now?
I think what's different is I didn't work for Senator Obama at the time, and I'm not familiar with the specific instance that you've cited. I do think the president was pretty forthcoming about the fact that this is a problem that has existed for a while, and neither side is blameless.
Now, today, California's board overseeing their health insurance exchange voted to keep cancellation policies going out despite the president's effort to delay those by a year. Meanwhile, the administration issued new policy guidelines for transitional policies for people who are not grandfathered in, and they're hopeful here at the White House tonight that other states beyond California will actually deal with this deferment, Brett.
Ed Henry live on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. Let's get some analysis now of what's going on with the Senate and with the president and the nuclear option. Syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer joins us from New York tonight. His book, Things That Matter, is #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Hello, Charles. Your thoughts?
Happy to be here. Well, I'm always amused by the nuclear option debate because it is, without a doubt, the most spectacular display of congressional hypocrisy, which is saying a lot. Because whenever the minority party is arguing, it says that this is a very important, indeed a majestic part of our Constitution. And as soon as the minority becomes a majority, like Harry Reid and the Democrats and Obama, all of a sudden it's a terrible instrument of obstruction. Look, as a matter of the means in which this was done, it was a rather low-down way. This is a fundamental change in the structure and the rules of the Senate, and done on strict party lines, which it should not be. Same way, incidentally, Obamacare, a major reform on party lines. That should not be. But on the substance of the change, I think the Democrats have stumbled upon the truth, as they do every decade or so. If you were not to know who's in power, I think it's a better idea for the president to have the ability to nominate his nominees, judicial and executive, without having to get a supermajority. And the other part of it, as a conservative, I would say, I am extremely happy that the Democrats are doing this. The prospects are very strong that the Democrats are going to lose the Senate next year, and there is an excellent chance of losing the White House. And the Democrats will absolutely rue the day, because they not only are going to allow a Republican majority, which will come one day anyway, to get its nominees through, but Chuck Grassley has said that when Republicans come into power, they're going to include Supreme Court nominees. And that would be a devastating blow to the liberals on the court and to the liberals in the country. So I don't think Democrats are going to remember this day with any joy in the near future.
How much do you think this had to do with Obamacare? Some Republican lawmakers think it had a lot to do with it.
It surely is a way to have something to talk about, some victory to bring home in probably the worst month for the Democrats in a decade, well, excluding the 2010 election. But I do think it was an issue that was roiling. They do want to have the power to at least put some judges in because they are losing on all the other elements of their agenda. So I think it was driven by the desire to do something substantive, leave a legacy, but it is a very short-run outlook. It'll leave a legacy of a few appointments, but the legacy is that the Republicans will return the favor in spades in the future.
And the status of President Obama and his administration at this point?
I think it's very short-sighted. I mean, this is a victory that will last a day and a half in the news, but the cancellation of the policies on Obamacare, the sticker shock when people see the premiums, the breakdown of the system of enrolling people is a daily story that keeps getting larger. It's an avalanche, and this is not going to protect them from the avalanche. It's a tent that will last about a day and a half.
All right, Charles, as always, thank you. Safe travels back here to D.C.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
What do you think about the nuclear option and what happened today? Do you have a question about it for the All-Star panel? Head over to facebook.com/BrettBairSR or let me know on Twitter @BrettBair. You can use the hashtag special report. Up next, what was thought to be a done deal is not in Afghanistan. But first, here's what some of our Fox affiliates across the country are covering tonight. Fox 46 in Charlotte with the Reverend Billy Graham getting out of the hospital after a brief stay for a respiratory problem. Fox 9 in Minneapolis-St. Paul on the rescue of 5 children from a submerged car this morning. They were unresponsive after up to 45 minutes in the near-freezing pond. The woman who was driving got out of the car when it hit the water. The conditions of the children have not yet been released. And this is a live look at Dallas from Fox 4. The big story there tonight, preparations for tomorrow's remembrance of the JFK assassination. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.